Hello and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. The standard disclaimer applies. The thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, send questions and comments to our Twitter page at Mason Roundtable or on the Facebook event page for episode 176, The Life of Albert Pike. As for me, my name is John Ruark, past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. And I will hand it off to Mike the intern for his introduction.
Hello, Mike Hambrecht here from Village Lodge number 274 in Burton, Ohio. Lodge Education Officer and Junior Steward. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Mike. It's always a pleasure. Mystery guest from Orlando. Will you sign in, please?
Buenas noches, Juan Sepulveda, host of the Winding Stairs Freemasonry podcast and a brother from Orange Blossom Lodge number 80 in Kissimmee, Florida.
Thank you, Juan. And last but not least, Jason Richards. What are you doing over there, Jason? I waited for you to take my... So this is
hey everybody, Jason Richards eating ice cream on the show tonight. Worshipful Master of Acacia Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia, and also a member of the Colonial Lodge number 1821 in the District of Columbia.
I was going to say, professionalism at its best. Wait till you go live to start eating an ice cream cone, because why not?
Technically, I started like 5 minutes before we went live.
And you're still not done?
Didn't want brain freeze.
Challenge accepted. Okay, let's go over to Masonic news. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. The first item up we have is for those who can't wait to spend money on something with a square and compass on it. You too can get Freemason toys now on sale in Japan. Mike, what's this all about? Your microphone.
Oh, these toys that the Japanese have come up with are rather interesting. I don't recognize them as symbols that we would use. It's mentioned in the article, though, that that Masonry is more often mentioned with Illuminati and Knights Templar, so that could be where this whole thing comes from. But they've got a cat, and I think his name is Maniki Nico. And then there's a traditional doll named Daruma, based on the founder of Zen. Tanuki, the mischievous raccoon dog. And an Osho king piece in shogi or Japanese chess. They've got a Mount Fuji volcano, the Mount Fuji volcano, which is possibly the site of the secret lair.
Shh.
And then we've got the model of the Tokyo Tower, which I'm assuming is, we made them build it or something,
Like
but
the Eiffel Tower.
It does.
Yeah, it does. It looks a lot like that. But this says, so clandestine Freemason members no longer need to identify themselves to each other through secret handshakes, passwords, or turkey-based rituals when they meet. They
As opposed to pork-based.
That's right.
The other way.
They can just flash their fancy new Freemason Catan Club souvenirs. And now so can you. And it looks like they go for about $2. What is it? $2.65 a piece. 300 yen.
I'm trying to figure out how you would do that in a meeting, like you're gesticulating wildly with your Doctor Strange bobblehead, and I dropped him, and there's the secret Masonic symbol on his boot. Do you think it's interesting that they use the word clandestine Masons? To me, it strikes me as more of perhaps a nuance in translation. One of those instances where they're not necessarily using the word with the connotation that we would use it here in the United States. It seems to me to be more geared toward the circumspect Masons who don't want to make a big deal out of their affiliation. But ostensibly, if you are a Mason and you know that this particular doll, has a Freemason symbol under it, you can technically recognize it just by sheer fact that the doll is there.
Yeah. It also says the Freemason Grand Lodge of Japan has not officially endorsed these designs.
No, of course not.
And Catan Club, it actually has a description of them as whose highly collectible and often bizarre models and cat cosplay items have been featured in the past.
Okay. Hey, a little bit of trivia. What video game did the Tanuki appear?
Super Mario Brothers 3.
Bing! Winner!
The Tanuki suit. It was
Love
a
it.
raccoon suit that helped you turn into a statue.
Ah,
He gets bonus points for that one.
Boom.
Great.
yeah.
That was right smack dab in the middle of my NES heyday in childhood.
I'm telling your age.
Now, was that the original
Okay,
Super
I'm the youngest
Mario?
person here.
Number 3.
Sorry, what, Mike?
Number 3.
That was in 3?
Yeah,
Okay.
3.
Okay. Next up, we have everyone's Masonically influenced dependent body, which is the Knights of Columbus.
The shrine?
Let's see. Why are we talking about the Knights of Columbus tonight? Jason. Well, of course, I waited for you to take a drink before I asked you. So you're eating.
Because apparently, according to an article that admittedly is a little bit dated, the Knights of Columbus are giving up their chapeaus and making some changes to their uniforms, as it will. I didn't realize that the Knights of Columbus actually wore chapeaus, so they really were inspired directly by Freemasonry.
There you go. There's some pictures on Chris Hodap's blog showing old-time marches to include Knights of Columbus and Knights Templars to show the similarity of the costumes, apparel. I don't know what you want. Costumes. It's all cosplay.
You're gonna get run through
Uniforms.
with, like, a Rusty Tyler
Uniforms.
sword
They're
today.
not real knights. Either one of them.
Hey, show me your chainmail.
That's right. Well, actually, I have a picture of Chris Hodap in chainmail at the bottom of the article, so technically he's a knight. I don't know.
Hashtag still better than a chapeau.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hashtag no more poodle hats. Nick Johnson were here, he'd be glad to show off his
Class A.
bus driver uniform that we call
Yes.
with the cap and mantle. But hey, you know what? There's some that are going to love it. There's some that are going to hate it. As for me, bring back the triangular aprons. That's all I got to say.
Yes, I agree. I like those.
So does everyone, except for the people in charge. Okay.
So far.
So far. Time to put you in charge. All right, Juan. Glad you could join us. Introduce yourself, please, and kick us off for tonight's topic.
Thank you. I've introduced myself. Stop drinking.
That's true. That's true. You did.
I love you too. Sorry for I barely made it tonight, but I'm happy to be here. But on the note of the Knights Templar triangular apron, I am with you 100%. We need someone on our side who joins their leadership and brings sense into their sartorial decisions.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Love that word.
Thank you.
$10 word.
Yeah, I'd totally join KT if they still had the triangular aprons.
Move your head, Jason. Show us what we're talking
Yeah,
about.
I was gonna say I could even wear my own.
Boom.
Thanks to brother Rick up at the Grand Lodge of Rhode Island.
Very cool.
Hashtag jealous.
Just not that special, John.
My mother says I'm special. All right. Juan, why don't you give us a brief introduction, and I will go into more detail about what tonight's topic is.
Excellent. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. This play with the mute button is confusing. Well, tonight we're talking about a man adventurous enough to venture west and also audacious enough to tackle the art of poetry. A crazy enough man to try to give form to the untamed system of Masonic degrees that at the time seemed to be spinning out of control. This brother is described as philosopher, jurist, orator, author, poet, scholar, soldier. As we can see, this is a part of the inscription that is in the only statue of a Confederate general to stand in Washington, D.C. This is no other than our brother, Albert Pike. And tonight, we're going to get to learn a lot of things about this brother who is held in such esteem by those who are knowledgeable in fraternity and held with incredible disdain by those who don't. So, John, kick us off.
All right. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. As I open another beer, I'll ask you to introduce yourself again sometime halfway through the episode.
I'll go get one and then I'll introduce myself.
Let's see. So, as a recap, Jason asked me to present a similar portion of this program at his lodge last week. I had the good honor of doing that, living so close to Jason, and no one left the lodge room, so that was good. That people stuck around the entire time. So what I'll do is hope to share with you what I found in my research of Albert Pike, and I wanted to begin by saying my original intent of researching Albert Pike was to see how did he get so smart, basically. What was all of his influence as a child? What was his environment or his thirst for knowledge? Where did that all come from to go on to write epic tomes to include Morals and Dogma and many, many more, which really take all these different mystery schools and tie them together into a unified system. Just amazing guy. So I wanted to find out how that occurred. And unfortunately, I couldn't find any resources about that. Just a smart guy, I guess, right? He was in the talented and gifted program. So instead, what I found was a guy even more interesting than before, in that sometimes the truth is even stranger than the fables and fiction that go around certain icons throughout history. So tonight's presentation is called Albert Pike, not the life and times, but the most interesting man in Masonry. And you'll find out why. So to begin, let's see, Albert Pike was born on December 29th, 1809, and died April 2nd, 1891. So he lived most of the 19th century. And to put things in a frame of mental reference, he was born the same year that Abraham Lincoln was born. So he was the same age as Lincoln when Lincoln died, and then continued to live on for many years after that. But it puts things into context of what was going on in America and in the formation of the man that we know as Albert Pike. So to begin, he was born in Boston, and I actually have another set of charts here. Let me freeze this for a second and bring up a little bit of a map, because this guy traveled quite a bit. And he started off being born in Boston in 1809 and grew up in the eastern coast of Massachusetts. He ended up going to Newburyport and Taunton and Plymouth and a couple other areas in that Boston greater metro area, and grew up, had a formal education, and actually was so smart that he passed the entrance exams for Harvard University. However, Harvard University asked him to pay 2 semesters in advance before he could be entered into to Harvard, of which his whole life he had been trying, to scrape pennies together in order to get into this formal education. And unfortunately, he could not afford the 2-semester advance. So he actually had to give up on his dreams very early in life to not apply to Harvard University. The good news is Harvard eventually, throughout his career, gave him an honorary degree later on, but he definitely earned it through his life experiences after that. So after giving up on his Harvard dream, he ended up teaching school in these neighboring areas right around Boston, and always an adventurer at heart, decided in 1831 to pack up his bags and head west on a trapping and hunting expedition. His goal was to get to Taos, New Mexico. So what he did was he packed up his bags and started heading toward Nashville, Tennessee. It was his first stop, and also stopping in St. Louis. And what was interesting was, first amazing piece of information is, for whatever reason, he actually ended up walking 500 of these miles on foot from Massachusetts to St. Louis.
Video or
Yeah, it's Pixar. It didn't happen. So it was amazing that not only was traveling in those days slow and tedious, but for whatever reasons, depending on your source, that a horse got spooked and ran away. But either way, he ended up just going on foot for this long distance. He's young enough, and he was adventurous enough. He took that journey on. So after leaving St. Louis, he joined an expedition to Taos, New Mexico, hunting and trading. And during the excursion, his horse broke and ran. This is where the numbers get fuzzy. He may have walked another 500 miles to Taos, New Mexico, over here. And he joined a trapping expedition in New Mexico and Texas. Didn't really get a whole lot accomplished there because he didn't really stay very long in this area of the West. And however, met quite a few Native Americans along the way, befriended them. In fact, one source says he actually became chief of one of the tribes while he was out there. So not only did this guy, pass Harvard entrance exams, but get rejected, walks, 500 plus miles, and then befriends, a lot of these Native American tribes, and really becomes almost an ambassador to them as far as being a white man, to be, well known and well liked by those tribes. Interesting fact about the 5 civilized tribes at the time. I think I have another slide here. Let me switch over to that. Stand by. Oh, let's see. Bring my slides back up here. Can you see those? Good. So yeah, so his general career: rejected from Harvard, taught school, joined the trapping party, and headed west. And then when he was coming back, taught school again. A little brief summary: he got married when he settled down, the second time, became an editor and owner of his own newspaper, then decided to pass the bar and then do law for the rest of his life. He was well known as a lawyer, and that was really his main profession. And then joined both the Mexican-American War and the Civil War that we'll talk about in a minute. I actually do have a picture of Albert Pike per Juan's request. I did find a picture here, and there he is out west wrestling a bear.
Are you sure that isn't Davy Crockett?
No, that's Jebediah Springfield, for those keeping track at home. Say, ask and you shall receive one. But back to these civilized tribes. So as you can see here, these were known as the 5 civilized tribes of the Indian nations: the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Muskogee, or known as the Creek Indians, the Chickasaw, and the Seminole tribes. His relationship with these tribes really extended further as he progressed later on, and we'll talk about how him being kind of the white man ambassador really helped them and helped him later in his career. So by let's see, what year is this? We're now in probably the 1832 time frame. He started to settle down in Little Rock, Arkansas, and oh, and by the way, on his way to Little Rock, ended up walking another 650 miles from Taos, New Mexico, back to Little Rock. So all in all, of that entire journey, he's already walked, over 1,100 miles, all on his own. So here's a little diagram of what that looks like. If you're looking at it from a map view, was made it all the way back to the middle of Arkansas, and carrying over 1,000 miles on foot. So that whole journey took about 3 months and 4 days to go along that, but he enjoyed the adventure. So what does any mountain man do when he's done trapping and hunting? He settles down and teaches school. So that's what he did. He went back to Little Rock, Arkansas, or that's where he started to settle down. And this is where most of his mature age, right? When he's really at adulthood, settling down. This is Little Rock in Arkansas is his home for many of his formative years. And it becomes home. He gets married in, let's see, what year was that? 1834. And he teaches school. So here's a picture of one of the schools that are still standing, the Albert Pike Schoolhouse in Van Buren, Arkansas. Here's another view from a different angle of that. So not a very big schoolhouse, but he was something he was good at. And of course we know he was well read by this point in time anyway.
I love that. I don't know why I hear my echo, but I just love the fact that you see all these, you see this thread that goes throughout his life where he has this desire to not just learn, but also to teach other people. And, thank God for the fact that he found time between his walking to do some of the teaching that we've inherited.
Well, so that's one thing I didn't include in this presentation is he wrote hundreds of poems as well along the way, and he would write about his experiences in poem form. A lot of these poems were very popular and sold and run in newspapers. So yes, he always he had a literary skill. He was always willing to share his experiences, and really goes down to that Albert Pike quote that I'm going to butcher right now because I'm trying to figure it out on the spot. But basically, if what we have done for us dies with us, what we have done for others is immortal. And you can really see that to Juan's point. Now, the next slide is really interesting. It's going to animate. And remember, we're talking where he is now in the 1830s in Arkansas. So he's down here in the middle of the United States. What we're showing you here is how the slave and free states formed in the United States of America while Pike was in Arkansas. So here's 1789. Everything west of Mississippi was basically owned by Spain. You can see the Virginia, Kentucky, Missouri line was really where the slave states started going south. And in 1836, Arkansas had a constitutional Congress to form as a state. It was just a territory at the time. Pike, being always involved but never in the center of attention, he was the official recorder for the state constitutional Congress. Now, here's what's interesting is he's always been known or been criticized for upholding the slavery provision of that Constitution. But if you look at where Arkansas falls, being surrounded by slave states, it really puts things into a unique context. And here's a quote from him. "It cannot certainly be supposed that it is for the interests of Arkansas to become a free state, surrounded as it would be by Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and the Indian tribes, all of them slave countries. Our state would become the land of refugees for runaways and vagabonds. So besides this, our revenue is to be raised from, and our rich land settled by the slaveholders." So really, he had no choice to help lead the discussion, as it has to be a slave state because of the geopolitical environment around it. Also, he was a big advocate for the United States of America. I mean, remember, he's born in the Northeast, so he's born a Unionist, right? But he's also for states' rights. He's very pragmatic, and that's really the theme. Because the other underlying theme I wanted to get to was Pike as big of a racist as the mythology of him holds? And this is one example where he is in the South. He's surrounded by that, befriends Indian tribes. So you can't say he's not necessarily racist among everything that's not another white man, but he's also a realist in the sense that there are certain political environments that the time wasn't right. Let's go down to, so now he helps Arkansas become a state in 1836 and really helps root him in that area. 3 years later, Pike says, I was my own teacher in the law. I soon began to get together my own law library, and in 1839 I began to purchase other books and to read them, never sleeping more than 5 hours at night, because he just decided, after printing a very successful book on law before he was a lawyer, he says, might as well become a lawyer then, right? So that's another interesting thing about him, is he didn't have a professional academic background in law, but he was so knowledgeable, so well read, that he could pass that bar very easily. So it's another fascinating thing. This is a guy who's walked hundreds of miles, thousands of miles almost on foot, becomes a school teacher twice, and the nail, just because of his timing and luck, I guess I'll go get my law degree. He teaches law in Arkansas for quite some time. And he, in 1846, practices in the Supreme Court of the state and in the district and circuit courts of the United States at Little Rock. And in 1846 was admitted to practice in the United States Supreme Court. So it's a noteworthy fact that he claimed to have been admitted to the bar of the United States Supreme Court simultaneously with a guy known by the name of Abraham Lincoln, and has been known to have been complimented by Daniel Webster, who heard him argue a case. Pretty neat.
That is neat.
So I was going to ask you about that, because for the the people listening, they might not, this is going to be very impressive for them to say, to hear, oh my God, he didn't go to law school, yet he was a jurist and he was someone of influence within politics and all that. How is that even possible? Well, this is not something that was as strange back in the day. Even Abraham Lincoln had a very limited education, most of it being his own. So it's not unheard of. And even now, that whole status quo is being challenged. You don't have to be a lawyer first to actually climb up the ranks in politics.
Yep.
Hashtag good old days.
Right. Yeah, it was much easier to get a law degree back then, or to pass the bar. There really was no such thing as a law degree by then, as I've been informed. So fast forward a couple of years, 1 or 2 more years, and boom, the Mexican-American War comes out. With his regiment, he fought in the Battle of Buena Vista, and Pike was discharged in June of 1847. He and his commander, Colonel John Selden Rowan, just were like oil and water. They never agreed on anything. And after the Mexican-American War, he had no qualms in saying how poorly run the unit that Colonel Rowan led. Colonel Rowan took that as a personal offense on his integrity, and this is back in the days where dueling was a common way of settling your personal integrity and your honor. So, Colonel Rowan challenged Pike to a duel. So they go near Fort Smith, Arkansas, actually maybe a little bit into the Indian Territory, because that's, outside of the jurisdiction of Arkansas, and they have a duel. So they stand on the banks of the Arkansas River, and he's been known to smoke a cigar up until they call for fire. Cool as a cucumber. He and Rowan, have their seconds, provide them their guns. They go do their 10 paces, turn, and they both fire. And no one's injured. So, the honorable thing to do is load up the gun and fire again. So they count to 10, fire. No one injured the second time around. It may have been noted that his beard had been blown by the wind of Rowan's shot. At this point, it's dishonorable for the seconds, meaning the gentleman, supporting the duel, to interrupt, right? Because even if the second comes in and says, hey guys, stop. If it's Albert Pike's guy, then Albert Pike's honor is lessened. But actually the other crowd that's there, kind of consider your thirds, right? The people supporting the supporters, both surgeons,
medical staff.
Right. The surgeons on both sides of both Rowan's and Pike said, you know what? Look, guys, we've already come here. We've already fired 2 shots. It would certainly be a waste for 2 honorable gentlemen to go through with this. Let's just try to settle things up. To which, after a brief discussion, Pike stood his ground, extended his hand, and Rowan came to him. And then they were said to have had a good conversation and left as friends. That's an amazing story for a guy who survived not only a duel, but a duel with 2 shots pointed right at him. So this was all on July 29th, 1847, was this infamous duel. Shortly thereafter, the Civil War broke out. We know him as, I think, brigadier general of a troop in the initially victorious Battle of Pea Ridge. It was his only battle that he saw with his own eyes. But what was interesting was he led a mostly Native American troop. So the context here is interesting, right? They're in Arkansas, the western part of Arkansas, right near Oklahoma, or what is to become Oklahoma. It's still Indian Territory at this time. He has these personal relationships with these Native Americans. And he's basically working with them to say, hey, look, if the South wins the Civil War, you'll get some of your land back, because even before Pike was born, this was all about the Trail of Tears and pushing most of the Native Americans out west into Indian Territory. The Trail of Tears happened, and basically they got gypped on millions of dollars of land, millions of acres of land, and they really had, they would write for their restitutions and not get them, and it was an awful thing the U.S. government did. And even before the Civil War, Pike was acting on their behalf. He was their personal lawyer to try to, and I believe got like $2.9 million in 1840s money back to some of the Native American tribes at that time. So that's a lot of cash and some of their land. So obviously they liked the guy enough that they would fight along with him. He leads this Battle of Pea Ridge, which the Confederates lose. But unfortunately, his leadership was lacking in the sense that he didn't really give them a lot of direction. And what ended up happening was the Native Americans did what Native Americans did at that time, which was go out to the wounded and dead, shoot the wounded, scalp the dead. And that word got out very quickly that he was really breaking a lot of the moral code of what you do with the fallen soldiers. So that didn't look good for Pike. He they fell into disarray. He was ordered to send his troops back to Arkansas in May of 1862, and he resigned in protest. So he took it personally as a failure of his own leadership, but also that stigma of him with all those scalping Indians really didn't leave a good taste in everyone else's mouth on him. So that was his only battle he saw during the Civil War. Another interesting thing to note is that weight that he carried of that event was also marred with some other losses in his personal life. Around this time, right before and during the Civil War, one son of his drowned in the Arkansas River in 1859. Another son was killed during the war. His wife died shortly after the war in 1868, and his eldest daughter died in 1869. So in a decade, he's lost 4 members that were of his family are very close to him. And really the narrative shows that he although enjoys Masonry after that, he definitely had a heavy heart based on these events. So in 1868, he packs up from Arkansas and moves to Washington, D.C. to conduct law, and he lives the next 33 years of his life out in Washington, D.C. in the Alexandria area, trying to really, find what to do in his golden years. The last thing of note that I wanted to add was that because I know people are going to ask, what was his Masonic career like? Let me bring up these slides again. And my research shows that his Masonic career included, in 1840s, while not Masonically oriented, he joined the Odd Fellows. But 10 years later, in 1850, he's still in Arkansas at the time, and he is initiated into Western Star Lodge, Little Rock, Arkansas. The next year became a charter member and charter master, worshipful master of a lodge in Arkansas, of a brand new lodge. So 1 year later, after becoming initiated, is worshipful master of a new lodge. The next year is the Grand High Priest of the Grand Chapter of Arkansas. So busy guy. So we know he at least got his Royal Arch degrees sometime between 1850 and 1852. But wait, there's more. In 1853, received his Knights Templar orders, I assume with the chapeau. And then in 1858, received his 4th through 32nd degrees in the Valley of Little Rock, Arkansas. So after receiving his 32nd, the very next year, in January, early of 1859, gets elected as the Sovereign Grand Commander of the Supreme Council of the Southern Jurisdiction of the United States. So, and he holds that title for the rest of his life for the next, 30 some odd years. So he's now the top dog of the Scottish Rite. We all know that of his history of having reformed and rewritten much of the Scottish Rite ritual. Not a lot of information on his Blue Lodge activity after that. But we know how critical he was to shaping and reforming the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite and its ritual that we know today. But just his Masonic timeline shows his zeal for learning and his commitment to getting things done. And I think it's just been a fascinating piece of information. So in conclusion, busy guy. He really didn't do much of note in the golden years, but was still a God-fearing man, and then had a small, quaint ceremony before he died. He a couple months before he died, he did write up his own services, funeral services that he wanted to do, and he really wanted it very low key, despite being well known, well liked, and very popular in the Scottish Rite. He was in the This is before the House of the Temple was built, right? So the House of the Temple was built like in the 1912s. So he died in 1891, I believe. 1891, April 2nd, 1891. So this is still centered in D.C., but the House of the Temple hadn't been built at this time. He currently is interred at the House of the Temple, downtown Washington, D.C., but he certainly left his mark on that. So with that, interesting guy, survived duels, had most of his family, taken from him early in life, led Native Americans through retributions from the government as well as through battle, and just an amazing character all around. And I really think that I learned a lot doing research for this that offsets some of the stigma that has come from what people would say that his character was solely focused on at the day, which I really haven't found conclusive evidence that puts him as strong of a racist that people would probably put him in. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions.
I wanted to ask, I heard something when I was listening to the Tyler's Place podcast a while back that he may have actually written something for the Royal Arch. Did you find anything out about that?
I did not find anything out about that.
Oh, okay.
Good question.
I don't remember what it was called that he had supposed, from the Tyler's Place, but it was one of those trick questions, besides the Scottish Rite, what other bodies did he write a book for, kind of thing. So,
right. So I mean, again, he was Grand High Priest in Arkansas for 2 years, so I'm sure he didn't rest on his laurels there either. Great. So how are things looking on social media then, Jason?
Well, first, I got a question for you.
Okay, then.
So Pike has this connotation of being a racist jerk. And it has been said that he either founded the KKK or at least was a member. What's going on there?
True or false? Multiple sources have done their homework trying to look into the exposés of the KKK at that time. Many people of which were named by name, and Albert Pike's name or any similarity thereof was found in none of the records. So that's one piece of evidence. He may have been a Klansman. You can't prove that he was, but you also can't you can't show evidence that he was for sure. And another thing I wanted to note too about there's also another quote that's been going on that was taken out of context about basically, I think it's along the lines of something about he didn't want to sit and lodge with a Negro. And that it's unfortunate. The source that I found is that one phrase was taken way out of context. Now, of course, you could say, well, how could that be taken out of context? Well, the longer portion, and I can probably post a link in the show notes, is where he's actually writing a letter in his golden years in September 13th of 1875, where he's talking about the regularity of Negro Masons and Negro Lodges in South America, West Indies, and the Grand Orient of Haiti. So he's talking about regularity and recognition, and which he goes on to say the Grand Orient of Haiti is as regular as any other. So basically, if Grand Lodges don't recognize it, shame on them. Now, he wasn't really going so far as to say that there should be unification and cross visitation, but not only did he say they were purely regular, just like all Prince Hall Masons were, because of their pedigree in where they trace back to the Grand Lodge of England, but also he was known to give Blue Lodge ritual to recognize Prince Hall Masons. So he saw them as, Masonic equivalents at that time, even if the context of society had them at a perpetual distance. So I think that's an interesting thing that often gets overlooked too, is that he was very active because of his influence as well in regularity, in recognition, and what clandestine activities were going on at that time.
So, John, we've got a question on our YouTube chat that's come up a couple times, and I don't know how much we can do to answer it, but the question is, did Albert Pike have a substantial influence on Prince Hall Scottish Rite?
An influence? No. I believe he did share some Scottish Rite rituals with some known Scottish Rite brothers. Let's see if I can glance at some of my notes rather quickly. Because I think there's an individual in particular that he was known to have shared correspondence with. Yeah, let's see. According to Art de Hoyos, some other guy, Thornton A. Jackson, Sovereign Grand Commander, United Supreme Council, 33rd degree, Southern Jurisdiction of PHA, from 1887 to 1904, was a personal friend of Albert Pike. After Jackson mentioned to Pike how seriously handicapped the PHA bodies were for a lack of adequate rituals, Pike is said to have given him an autographed, complete set of the Scottish Rite rituals.
Autographed, you say?
Autographed. A complete set. So there you go. So at least there's one instance where he had supported PHA Scottish Rite.
Really interesting. That is, unfortunately, actually about all we've got. Outside of a note from Brother Scott Sherman, who says that it's interesting that Pike is described as being the most famous Mason. Being in the North, if I had not been into reading and learning, and for most of the 5 years in D.C., and battled with anti-Masons in the Masonry Forum days on CompuServe, I would have had no idea who Pike was.
Ah, because of the Northern jurisdiction.
Yes, the Northern Masonic jurisdiction.
Right.
So yeah,
that's interesting.
Pike, of course, had a substantial influence on the Southern jurisdiction, having rewritten most of those degrees. However, in the Northern Virginia, in the Northern jurisdiction, he doesn't really have any place.
Okay. Well, if that wraps things up, Jason.
That wraps things up.
We'll go to Mike the intern for any final questions, thoughts, comments, and shameless plugs.
Well, honestly, that was very good. I learned quite a bit. A lot of stuff, like you had said earlier, that I would be surprised at. That 500 miles and 500 miles more, just, I mean, really just walking all that by, like that, I can't even imagine that today, and it's, I mean, I've done my own share of walking, and, I walked in a marathon, but man, that's, that's impressive. I'm trying to think. I didn't really have any new questions based on this. It's a shame that we don't have more about him with Blue Lodge, especially with the writings of his book Esoterica, which is about Blue Lodge too. But he's fantastic. So that's all I have for tonight. Let's move it on.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Let's go over to Jason Richards then.
All right. So interesting episode. I have to thank John. He actually, gave a similar talk at my lodge just this past week. So Albert Pike, I think he gets a pretty bad rap, and I think perhaps some of that is deserved. But he did write prolifically. He was a very, very intelligent man. He was a bit of a savant. And I have yet to read Morals and Dogma, and to be honest, I probably won't at any point, in the near future at least. And not being a Scottish Rite Mason myself, I don't really have knowledge of all of the ways that he helped influence Scottish Rite Masonry. But still an interesting figure, a polarizing figure, but a very, very interesting one, and one who has undisputedly made advancements and innovations in our craft. Innovations in a good sense, not innovations in the Grand Lodge bad, no innovations.
That's probably why he did it in Scottish Rite. He's like, you know what? I'm not going to get in trouble this way.
These degrees are crap.
Let's put these aside over here. All right. Thanks, Jason. Looks like Juan is away, so I will proceed to wrap things up. Another thing I found interesting too, I forgot to mention it at Jason's Lodge too. In my research, those Native Americans, more specifically the 5 civilized tribes, included a lot of Master Masons. Pike was known to help form a Native American only Master Masons Lodge, in the sense where the members were seated and filled, officer positions were seated and filled by Native Americans of different tribes, by the way. And at one point, all of the chiefs of the 5 civilized tribes were also Master Masons. So one can only speculate, did that help his relationship with the Native American tribes, and to include the negotiations as he worked for them and with them for the reparations of the United States government. So he was that Masonic middleman to bridge the gap of these brother Native Americans and the U.S. government, for which, again, Masonry, I'm sure, played a part in that as well. And so if you want to hear more from me, I'll be at the Masonic Society conference coming up next month in Louisville, Kentucky. You can check that out at a website that I lost at the moment, so we'll post that in the show notes. But again, you'll hear more about that next week as well. So stay tuned for that. Guys, I appreciated doing the research for the show. Jason, thank you for the opportunity to speak at your lodge. And if you want to hear more like this, reach out to any of us. And on our website, theMasonicRoundtable.com, you can find out how to get any of us to come speak at your lodge on similar topics. With that, thank you very much for watching, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.